It was so bad. I think one day I cried because I was so disappointed.
Welcome to Hired the Podcast. I am Travis Miller. This is a conversation about the world of work with some of the best and brightest across industries. And today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Carrie Graham. Dr. Graham is an adult learning expert and instructional design strategist who has over 25 years of experience designing learning experiences to improve engagement, ensure information retention, and appropriate skill application. Wonderful biography, Carrie, but I am very curious, how on earth does somebody get a doctorate in adult education?
Well, Travis, thank you so much for having me. And it's honestly, before I ventured on this journey, I had the same question, quite frankly. I really did. Coming from a healthcare background and 20 years in healthcare and healthcare education, I recognized that it was time for me to go ahead and get a doctorate degree. And so looking around to figure out what is it that really interests me and what's going to help support my career, I took one class in workplace learning and I was hooked.
What hooked you?
Well, I felt like, quite honestly, I felt like I was in my own therapy session, right? Because it was workplace learning. The conversations solely focused around what contributes to people learning at work, what helps them actually learn and then apply the information as they work, whether it's formally or informally, right? Like that on the job training as well. But then there was this segment of our conversations around what are the barriers? What are the things that actually are getting in the way of people learning at work? And what that does is it impacts their ability to do or apply the thing that you want them to learn. So it was a great first course for me. And I'm so happy that was my introduction because I use that lens all the time. What are organizations doing to support learning? And what are the potential barriers that exist?
Well, that's a big part of the conversation that I'm super curious about, because it's a challenge that not only do I see organizations run into all the time, but frankly, we run into it all the time ourselves, is what are some of the big things that are preventing people from leaning in? Why is learning at work, why can learning at work be such a challenge for companies and for individuals?
Yeah, well, the way I'll answer that question is purely through the adult learning from a theoretical perspective, right? And the theory would identify that we have to look at the adult learner as someone who has rich life experiences. And there are some other tenets, but that's the one I want to focus on. So we have our own life experiences and we have our own understandings and opinions and mental models of our learning. So what happens, and what I've seen consistently in my clients as well as in talking to others, is businesses and organizations focus on two things. They focus on the content that's being presented, and from the sense of, well, we have these outcomes that we need to achieve. And so this is the information that's going to help us get to that outcome. So they focus on the content. And then there's a focus on how the information is presented, right? And so we are in an age where entertainment is a factor. Gaming is a factor. Using artificial intelligence is a factor, right? All of those things are contributing to how the information is presented, but rarely is attention given to who are these people that have to sit through the training. And when that, there is a focus to the who, it's really based on demographic information or the role that they hold, right? Oh, these are new hires. This is all the information that they need. Oh, these are our middle managers. These are executives. And so when organizations are developing and they actually think about the who, they're still thinking about the who through a very specific lens. They're not focused on who is the individual as a learner in general.
How do companies do that? It's something I've heard you speak a lot about, is focusing on the values of the people that you're trying to educate. But as an organization, unless you are a 3-person organization and you're trying to train 2 of them, it seems incredibly difficult to tailor the training program, the educational content, to the values of an individual when either there are a vast number of individuals, or you've got a smaller number of individuals but with their own unique values. How do you do that?
Yeah, I would, and that's a great question, Travis. I would propose that there are multiple ways to get at that information. With a business that has about 50 to 100 people, one of the things that I'm an advocate of is thinking about and being intentional in the hiring process. So if you're simply hiring live bodies, it is incredibly challenging to get at someone's value system and such. But if you're being intentional, right, in the interview process, and you're asking questions about, well, why do you want to work for this organization? What is something that's important to you? Having a record of those, and then this is where some data analysis falls into play, but having someone that can look at that information and pull out some key elements for the group that's about to be trained. It may be slightly different for each group of individuals that need to be trained. But that's one element that I think, or one approach that I think people really overlook. They think about training in isolation when in actuality, it should be informed by the steps before it, and training should always continue throughout someone's tenure within an organization.
Tell me more about that. I mean, you dig into that a little bit more. How do you start the training before a person is even on board?
Yeah. So it's a couple things. You have to go back to what is the output, not what is the output, but what is the outcome? What is the objective of the training? If the training is to introduce a new type of technology to existing staff, let's say, I would argue that you have to have your key points around what is this key information or skill set that people need to know, right? So that's there. Then that's when I say, let's get a sense of what do people already know. Mm-hmm. Right? There are multiple ways, right? We can have focus groups, you can do surveys, or you can simply take the time to talk to people and get a sense of where they are, and asking them, well, what is important, right? We've got we're going to bring on this new technology. What are some things that you want to know in the process as we go through this? And then taking that and building from there. So you've got a sense of where people stand, but now we're in the training, right? Something that I've also seen that people don't do is they don't ask for feedback and insight from the attendees in the moment. They might pose the question, but they don't provide time and space for people to be reflective, right? So if you and I were in a training, Travis, and we've got this new technology, I've done some research around where you are in the process of this new technology. And now that we're here, I'm going to say, Travis, this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over how do you use this new piece of equipment. What are your thoughts on it? Before we even get started, what are your thoughts? Because when you do that, whoever is the facilitator that's where you get the barometer of, oh, these people are here begrudgingly, right? Or they've got a lot of opinions about this new implementation. And so we can use that, which is their value system, to guide the presentation moving forward.
I could definitely see that. We went through over the last couple of years, we replaced a key piece of software about 2 years ago. And it was one of the biggest mistakes as a business that we've made. And we got very little input from the people that would be using that software. We just, as leadership, said, we have piece of software A, it's okay, but it's not doing everything we want. Software B over here looks like it does it really well. Let's shift. Let's implement that. Yeah. And it was a disaster. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible business decision. It was complicated. The training was obtuse. We didn't have buy-in from the start. And frankly, we could not get out of that software system fast enough. Fast forward to about a year and a half later, and we knew that was not the long-term decision, but we brought in a half dozen of our people to help us evaluate what we were going to move to next. And it was a long process. We invested a lot of person hours. We invested a lot of money in having the people who were going to be use it assess the systems, assess how it was going to be used, look at different options. And when we finally made the decision, it was unanimous that this was the system we were going to go to.
Right.
And the buy-in and the dedication and willingness to learn, to train, to grow, and be part of the training, it was the two experiences could not have been more different. And so I see what you're saying, that when you get the buy-in for what people want and how they want to be taught, it becomes significantly more effective.
Right. And I think, first off, let me say congratulations for learning the lesson and then making the change the next go around. But that's exactly it. You know, you asked the question, how do you learn about the value system? Well, you did that, providing people an opportunity to give input and insight. That's part of the value, because they can appreciate this works for us. Regardless of what the marketing says around the software says, given our culture here and how we do the work, these are the things that matter, and these are the things that will make it easier for us to do our best work. So it's, how do you understand people's values? There's multiple ways to do it. You really have to figure out what is going to work best for your organization and the people within your organization.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a question about that, because regardless of, no matter how well somebody does that, they develop, they implement their educational program, their training, the adoption of it, the ability to utilize it, I'd imagine, like just about anything, it's a bell curve. On one end, you're going to have a couple people who nope, I'm out. This isn't for me. I don't get it. I don't want it. You're going to have the majority of your people who are relatively engaged and getting benefit from it. And then you're going to have a couple at the very end who are acolytes. I mean, they could not be more into it, and they are going to evangelize the message of this training.
Right.
Which group should you focus on the most? Should it be, let's lean into the heavy adopters, let's celebrate them, let's focus our attention on the people who are really into it, or the people who are like, no, this isn't for me? Do you try and win them over, move them up the curve, or do you focus on the majority, the people that are there? They're engaged, they're getting some benefit from it, but maybe not as much as others, but certainly more than some.
Yeah. I think that's such a great question, Travis. And I think you really have to be careful when people are using the bell curve model to identify where their focus is, because we have all been in organizations where people get left behind, and the result, and that's the thing, it's the result of what happens when people get left behind. They become disgruntled. They are not doing their best work, right? So be careful. I want to caution people to be careful of that. But that is an opportunity, again, to look at who potentially might be the resistors, who might be in the middle of the pack, and who are going to be the early adopters. Because if you can, look at the trend and identify that the people where you get most of the resistance from are individuals who are at the later tenure of their time with the organization. So they've been there for so many years. And, a common statement from individuals like that is, oh, this is a fad. We've seen it. It's not going to work. This is just a different iteration of it. Those are individuals that I would say don't dismiss their wisdom, but rather bring them on early in to vet a system and ask them, well, what are the mistakes that you've seen happening over the years? Because not only are you gaining wisdom from the individuals that perhaps might be the resistors, but you actually are getting them invested in the process and hopefully in the adoption phase. Now, then you also have like the bell curve of individuals. That's another place where they're going to move the needle. Mm-hmm. But within that, there is a lot of variation. And so you don't know why they're moving the needle, but you don't want to leave that to chance. Understanding where your people are in their career journey also contributes to that. And then the early adopters, right? We always love them, but I also think there's a danger to putting all your eggs in that basket as well, right? So it's, oh, well, we're going to use this system or the software, whatever the case may be, in a way that the organization didn't intend or doesn't want it to happen.
Yeah, I see that a lot, and I've seen you talk about that before, is having your training strictly be reactive. That
yes.
This is a problem we are having now, so we're gonna train and teach on that. Right. And you get a lot of pushback, and it's creating resentment in organizations.
Absolutely. And the reason there's lots of reasons, but one of the reasons that I've witnessed is, yes, the training is reactive, but then when the training is happening, there's still no time and space devoted to let's discuss, let's address the foundation or the core of the issue, and what are some potential problems. But rather, it's all in reaction. This mistake was made. This is what needs to happen to correct it, and hands are washed of it. It's like teaching your children when they make a mistake. There is a level of conversation that happens around that, regardless of how significant the mistake was. It's the same thing. It really is exactly the same thing in the workplace. Mm-hmm.
And I'd imagine a lot of times what'll happen is there's a problem. A company will train on fixing the problem. Mm-hmm. Somebody will half-heartedly take that training, kind of implement it. It won't do anything. And they say, well, I did what you told me to do and it didn't work. So now it's your problem. And that's creating more resentment.
Absolutely. And so again, that's where I say, like, it's in instances like this where I really push organizations to identify it's not about the content. It's not about the facilitation. It's about the people. Like it's in these instances absolutely where it really matters. And accidents happen, or things that, come from governing agencies that we didn't see this coming, but here we have to do this. There's no harm in sharing, being transparent and saying, this is what it is. Mm-hmm. And we didn't see it, or we weren't prepared. Here we go. We need all hands on deck, which includes all values on deck, all thoughts on deck, and beliefs. because we need to rectify this so that it doesn't happen again in the future.
So and maybe you can't answer this because each business is unique, but what are some of the best strategies that companies can do to identify the horizon? What's in the future? Where should we be focusing our training efforts now to help avoid pitfalls, problems, and catastrophes down the road that we think we see coming?
Yeah, you're right. You are absolutely right. I can't predict the future for all the organizations out there in terms of what may be on the horizon. But one thing I can guarantee is that today, right now, is an opportunity for organizations to look at their training process and their training culture. What are the practices and belief systems around how training is coordinated, how it is facilitated right now? So, for example, I have a client one of my current clients is growing. They are expanding with new hires this year, and they do not have a sequential and organized training system for their new hires through the first year. They don't have it. Now, what they do know is on the future is that they need to make some new hires. They don't know who those people will be. And so what they've chosen to do right now is say, instead of leaving our training processes to chance in the future, we need to get it organized right now. And so that's what I'm helping them do, is organize the process for training new hires. So that is something everyone can do right now. If you consistently recognize that your employees are not motivated and they're not actively engaging in the training process, that's an area to look. What practices can we change so that people are leaning in during the trainings? The other element is the way content and training experiences are built. Do people come in wanting to learn, but they seem to be going through the motions, but they're not applying it? Perhaps it's because they're overwhelmed by the way the content is presented. Perhaps it's the facilitation method. Like, there are elements within that, and the same holds true for application. Are you supporting people in developing the skills that they need to do the thing long term?
I see that a lot, and I wonder how companies. Oh, you just gave us a good starting point on how to combat that, but almost every person in a professional setting says that they are dedicated to learning and growing and continually trying to be a better version of themselves than they already are.
Correct.
And so often it feels like lip service when they're not, especially if they're doing well, they're successful. They don't want to go through the effort and challenge of learning and changing. And is that because they're comfortable, or is that because the training that they're being presented with is not speaking to their values, is not giving them the advantage that they want for themselves?
I would say yes to both of those. Honestly, I think it's both of those. I think anyone who's listening to this can attest that they went into a training with a level of internal motivation and expectation. And once they got in, it was like, I'm over it, right? And so it is the training. It's also the people. Now, one of the things that I think we need to acknowledge is that people enter into an organization with their own expectations of what the organizational culture is based on what they were told during the hiring and interview process, but also of their own career and their career ambitions, right? So we start off on this one page. once people get into the organization, they may see, you know what, this is not a place that I can advance my career because of whether it's the politics, the structure, whatever the case may be, whereas they thought they could, right? So there could be the questioning of, why would I attend a training to get more skills when I'm not going to get promoted, right? So there's that level of thought. The other level of thought that I think we need to, in having this conversation, we need to acknowledge is that people's reasonings for pursuing and learning advanced information and skills, it evolves. You know, prayerfully, not any one of us is the same today as we were yesterday. But it changes, right? So yes, I've had a great career, 25 plus years in this one industry, and my interests and my desires for the way I want my life to go changed. And that industry no longer fit it, right? And so sometimes people find themselves, and that is in fact another element of adult learning, is that social roles change. And so how people identify themselves or how they perceive themselves, what is important to them, it evolves. And if you consistently are building trainings with the idea that everyone that came in is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and they're all trying to advance their careers, you're fooling yourself, quite frankly, right? Like it just isn't true. You know, there are some individuals who are highly educated who, given where they are in life, you know what? I don't want to use all that education. I just want to sit and I want the routine where I don't have to make decisions and things like that. And you can't question, again, this is the humanist in me. You can't question or belittle or disparage that in an individual if that is where they are. They have chosen that.
And there's also the difference between, well, looking at somebody's motivation for the want to, but also the ability to. I was listening to your conversation with Cynthia Zenti, and I'll put the link to that conversation down in the show notes because it was great. And you were talking about how I'd imagine you're probably in the top 1% of people who are always learning. I'd imagine you're always trying to continue to educate yourself on everything. And you're talking about how you love the History Channel, you love watching the documentaries about how things are made, about how factories work, about how machines are manufacturing things. And despite your love of learning about that, you're not the one to go in and fix the packaging machine, no matter what.
I'm not.
And I thought that was so interesting that people can have the passion for learning, they can have the desire to learn, they can even learn how to do it, but it doesn't mean they're going to be able to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if I were motivated to build a piece of equipment, right, that's different, right? Because, okay, I have to know these skills. So hopefully wherever I am learning these skills, they are supporting my skill development so that I can do it. And it's the same thing in the workplace. If someone wants the information, okay, they're there. But the way that you, the business, the organization leans into them is to provide them with absolutely everything that they need to do the thing. And it is. I was thinking about our conversation this morning because the language around lifelong learner, I think so often people think about it from a formal perspective, right? Like, oh, I want to take a class, or, oh, I want to, read a book or whatever. And quite frankly, Travis, after being in healthcare and then getting a PhD, like I have no desire to get any level of certification whatsoever, right? Like even a driver's license, quite honestly, I'm like, oh, please don't ever let me have to take the test again. But every day I am in fact learning, right? Like how can I be a better communicator to my spouse? How can I grow these vegetables in a pot that for the last 2 years they keep dying? How can I keep the plants in my office alive, right? Like there are different things that are important to me, and that's the learning. But those are things that are important to me internally, and so I'm motivated, and we can't discount that in the work environment. We cannot discount that people have different motivations for the work and the learning that they do.
What vegetables are you trying to grow?
Well, I haven't started yet this year because actually, it's great for this conversation. It didn't work last year. So my first year, I bought some potted, like a tomato and some herbs, and they're no vegetable, just herbs and the tomatoes, and it did well. So the next year I said, okay, I can do this. Literally everything died. Nothing even budded. It like little sprouts would come up, and then
You couldn't even get like the basil to come up? Not even the herbs?
No, I couldn't get anything to work. And so like it's the same thing in a training experience, right? Like I read the books, I was on YouTube, I was Googling, I was excited. And because my experience was so bad last summer, like I am like, I don't want to go through it again. I just don't. And so it's the same thing, I think, in the workplace. You know, you have people who might leave one organization and come to another, and the organization they left, they had great learning experiences. And then they get here and it's like, oh, this is lackluster. This is not supporting me in any way. I'm just going to go back to buying my vegetables at the grocery store, right? Like it just doesn't, it leaves a lot to be desired.
Or even worse, they have a great experience one place, they go to another place, and the experience is so bad that no matter where else they go, they're so soured on it that they can't take advantage of it anywhere else. Are you really not going to try again this year?
I don't think I am. And if I do, I'm not going to grow from seeds. Like, I think that's the part that's really upsetting to me. If I do, I'm going to grow something that has already bloomed. And I'll just put it in a pot and take care of it, right? So it's the same thing. I'll just maintain my skill set. It was so bad. I think one day I cried because I was so disappointed. I was so, it was because I was so excited, right? People go into new organizations like with excitement, like I'm going to get to learn some things. And then the experience is so bad. It can be, they can be. You know, the other consequence I want to share with you is, and I've publicly shared this story, so I'm not going to name names, but I've worked at an organization who had mandated sexual harassment training. And I'll never forget sitting through this. There were about 200 people in my session, attendees. People were sleeping, they were on their phones, they were having general conversation during this mandatory training. And all while at the same time, there was a pretty public sexual harassment case going on attached to this organization. And that was very sobering for me because it was in that moment that I realized it doesn't matter that it's required. It doesn't matter how much money is spent to make it nice and, welcoming, but rather it's about the content, in this case, the content delivery, and making sure that people are connected to the values, right? Like there was no invitation for people to share their value system around sexual harassment behavior. And okay, that was my experience. Well, clearly this is pervasive within this organization, so much so that they're in court. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that experience is unique to any industry. They're in public safety, there are consistently trainings around safety, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, but yet things happen. And so it is a opportunity, especially for organizations that say they care and value about their employees. This is one way to demonstrate that. Do your employees justice by providing them with a high quality training experience that, as we've said earlier in this conversation, guides them into doing their best work.
Goes back to what we were talking about earlier, as a reactionary measure. People resent it or don't care about it, versus if that organization's core values were respect for others, respect for individuals, then they wouldn't have been in that situation. And that training probably would have been embraced if that was the organization's values.
Right. And the other thing to that, using that example, it's, well, how was the training facilitated? Oh, it was facilitated as sign up for one of these days at one of these very specific times, and we're going to gather you by the masses to go through this very performative checkbox sexual harassment training.
Yeah, it's not even training, it's a lecture.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Sadly. So, how can you expect people to change their behaviors and their beliefs on that topic in the workplace when this is the way they are presented with a new potentially belief or a new skill set or even a way to problem solve? We're here and check it off. Okay, you can go.
So one thing we haven't talked about, and I want to make sure that we touch on before we go, is for the individuals who do want this, how can they best go about identifying the companies, the organizations, the leaders, and the mentors that will support this, that they can do their best job of learning and growing with an organization if that's something they want? How can they do their best to find it?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I've been on both sides of the hiring table, so let me just first say that many, many times. And so I encourage people that if you are looking for an organization that will support your career development, during your interview process, you need to ask those questions. And don't simply ask it once, right? Like, oh, are there resources available? But rather ask detailed information. If you are in a industry that has an annual conference, are there funds that will support you attending that? Right? Because then you're not left with choosing, oh, I have to pay, so I can't afford it, so I'm not going to go, right? So if it's important to you, you have to ask the questions and get very clear about how your organization is willing to support you, right? So that's one. Another part of that is if you are, and I think that really holds true for people who are early on in their career. I would argue that for individuals who are mid to later career, asking questions about not only about the training, but what all does it encompass? Is this an organization that supports me as a full person, or are they only providing training to do the job? Mm-hmm. For example, does the organization offer stress management training? Does your organization support a nutrition and a wellness levels of training, or is it just in your benefits package, right? Like, are there things that allow me to be the full person that I am? Because if someone is struggling, in areas of their life that are personal, it has a direct impact in their performance and the job, and vice versa. So that's something that I think it's within reason that someone who's on the job market can do is do your research on the organization. But when you get to that place of being in front of the hiring committee or hiring manager, you really need to ask the questions around what does training and development look like. Another part, Travis, is if this is someone who is in leadership position or aspires to, what training and support is available for them? Because I think it is fair to say that many individuals in management and in leadership have not been trained to hold those positions. And so, if this is an organization that says that they care about their employees, it should be the staff and team level employees as well as the leadership and management of those individuals. So is training available so that people don't find themselves in these positions that they're not equipped to handle?
That's a pitfall I see organizations fall into a lot, where somebody will be very successful doing job A. Company says, "Oh, you've been great at doing job A. We would like to promote you to leading and developing people doing job A." And they won't give them any training or additional resources on how to do that. And teaching and leading people doing job A is very different than doing job A.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that is something that's really important. And companies or organizations that don't have those levels of training available that I've mentioned, so the ones that are around personal development, but also around management and leadership development, they are doing themselves a disservice, and they are taking a risk financially with their bottom line. Because if you place someone in a management position and they are unskilled at how to effectively manage people, you are now going to lose individuals. You're going to lose employees. And we all know that hiring someone is far more expensive than maintaining the people that you have.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Carrie Graham, this has been fantastic. I really, really appreciate you taking some time to speak with me here today. I'm sure the audience does as well. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best things for them to reach out to you about, and what's the best way for them to find you?
Absolutely. So if there are businesses who are looking to improve their training programs, whether it's onboarding or internal training in general, yes, you should reach out to me. I take a humanistic view, and they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I say LinkedIn because it's a place where you can listen in to some of my virtual conversations that I'm having with people, and even ask some pointed questions to get the conversation started. So that I would say that that's the best place to reach out to me. And I'm always available and always happy to have conversations.
Carrie, Dr. Graham, thank you so much. Big thank you to Noah Cuff, our producer. This has been Hired the Podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.